You're listening to The Greater Loop, a podcast from the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. In each episode, we bring to you leaders who connect Houston to the world, from business to diplomacy, innovation to impact. This is where global conversation begins. Let's get started.
Welcome to the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston's The Greater Loop, a podcast featuring global experts from our city and around the world. Today, our guest is Stuart Vogt. He is the Vice President of Corporate Tax at Transocean. Stuart, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you've joined us today. You're not only a board member, but a great friend of the World Affairs Council. Tell us, what does someone who is a tax director with a major company like you, what do you do all day? What's your day job?
Well, as the VP of Tax, our function oversees the tax landscape for the organization, anywhere from tax compliance, filing tax returns, and making tax payments, up to tax reporting, which you see on the financial statements of the company, what we call the tax provision. And then, of course, we are audited by numerous jurisdictions, so defending our audits and working with the governments, as well as, what we would say tax planning, which is, ensuring that the organization is aligned, the business strategy is aligned with what happens in the tax world.
And I know a lot of people in Houston probably know the name Transocean, but what are all the things that you do? You guys have your hands in so much.
Well, from a certain perspective, we're a simple organization, though behind all that is a very complex thing that we do. But simply speaking, we drill, and we drill primarily for hydrocarbons and, offshore. And so it's a maritime company at heart. And we can drill for anything, though, but 99% of what we drill for is for hydrocarbons. So obviously the engineering is very complicated, and the procedure of doing that is very complicated. We have some charts that would show that most of our newer rigs are larger than aircraft carriers. And so they're quite enormous pieces of equipment that obviously are mobile, that can sail around the world. And so it's a pretty fascinating industry to be in.
So how often does the Vice President of Corporate Tax get to go out on a rig?
Very rarely. Now, when they come into port, it's a little easier. Sometimes we can go out with a VIP member. I have been on a rig before, but when they're operating, there's so much activity going on. Safety is, paramount. And so you can't get in the way, obviously. And to go out on the rig when it's operating just requires some training, not only on the helicopter ride out there, but also while you're out there.
Mm-hmm. So Transocean, you've been with them through some significantly big industry shifts. What originally drew you to offshore drilling, and what keeps you passionate about the work?
Well, this kind of ties back into the question you asked me about what do tax people at Transocean do, or what do tax people in general do? And that is, in the offshore drilling world, because the assets are mobile and they sail around the world, we move jurisdictions to jurisdictions frequently. And the tax then impact of that is quite significant. Whereas you might think of a retail company, they have a facility that manufactures their product, they sail it or they ship it in some way over to the retail facility where then it's sold to the consumer. Most of those items are fixed in place, brick and mortar. Whereas our facilities, the equivalent of a facility, move, and therefore our service moves. And because of that, we enter and exit jurisdictions quite a bit. And on top of that, the capital nature of the organization being that it's very capital intensive, requires a lot of third-party financing. All of those items intertwine with tax, especially in the cross-border realm. And so that keeps tax professionals very engaged with the business, more so than in other jurisdictions. In other industries, I should say.
Sure. So geopolitically, so much goes on with maritime security, kind of shifting alliances, trade routes. How does this all impact Transocean's global operation when things change?
Well, we are knee deep in that. I mean, from a maritime safety perspective, given the size of the asset and generally speaking, who's probably on board, we're not really boarded or targeted very much by pirates or other issues. But I would say that in reality, though, the impact that we have in that realm has more to do with what we're doing. There's a resource underneath the oceans that the world needs. And we unlock that resource. We give the access to a production company, whether that's Shell or Chevron or even a smaller one. We drill the well, and then they're able to access that with the production platform, which would unlock that resource for the world. And that resource, as we all know, is very valuable and has had many issues with that. I mean, it's usually in every campaign we have in the U.S., presidential campaign, across the world. And so getting that resource out is really more the issue of what we face, I would say, in the geopolitical space, rather than the asset itself having like some sort of maritime security issue. Though it has happened. We have had people attempt to board the rigs, but it is somewhat limited.
Mm-hmm. You kind of alluded to it. There are so much that goes on in the drilling space. What innovations might you be aware of that you think are exciting right now?
Oh, there's a ton. I mean, safety, efficiency, and environment emissions are the three big buckets, and you can go read that on our website. Always improvements on safety, better equipment that would reduce touch points by humans, which reduces safety incidents and makes it safer for people. Those are big area of innovations. The second one being emissions. I mean, that's obviously something that's of a global concern. So the equipment that we bring on board, as well as the engines that drive the rig, the emissions they put out, to reduce those and to reduce their carbon footprint. And of course, the last one, efficiency. How fast can we drill in a better way? And so all three of those those three buckets are where we see a lot of improvements.
And you guys operate around the world 24/7. How do you see global geopolitical developments impacting offshore drilling?
Oh, a lot. But I mean, it's kind of more what I said. It's not so much the activity of what we do as it is what we're doing, which is unlocking the resource of the hydrocarbon, which whether it be oil, natural gas. And we don't really drill for coal, but I guess in theory it could be. But it's really that resource. It's, can we get access to the resource? And those are issues we see cross-border everywhere. Across the Middle East, down through the sub-Saharan area of Africa, Central and South America, very dependent on hydrocarbons. The India subcontinent, Southeast Asia, China are so dependent on the hydrocarbons, and where can they get them from? I mean, there's land, obviously, drilling, but there's also offshore. And so can you get a resource there, and can you unlock that resource for somebody then to turn it into something usable? I mean, a stat I would always say that most people get surprised about, it's not quite 50-50, but it's almost 50-50, that what we drill for, the hydrocarbon we drill for, is almost 50% for transportation fuel that would be turned into fuel, refined into fuel, but the other half turns into consumer products. So the clothes you're wearing, that table behind you, the paints you use, the jellies we use, the rubber tires we use, the iPhones that everybody uses is loaded with oil. And it's all used to make all kinds of different products. And so it's in demand for very different reasons. And I think that's where the geopolitical tension can come in. Obviously, if you were to just cease offshore drilling, you would then cease the ability to get that resource to people for their needs.
So, Stuart, as a follow-up question, you said half of the production is put into making consumer products. Tell us a little bit about that evolution of consumer products and sustainability and the impact on renewable energy.
Yeah, that's also a good question. As I said, it's about 50-50. And obviously, we all know about hydrocarbons that become fuel, right? Fuels that go into cars and planes and other vehicles. And when that gets consumed, then that emits more emissions. The cars, we all know, have exhaust. However, on the consumer product side, it is a little bit different. So I don't think you hear as much about it. I also know that people are really very aware that when you look around your daily life, from plastics to glass to paints to lacquer to different things that finish wood and houses, how much petroleum and how malleable petroleum is. But the making of those products is less emissions. So it is a little bit easier. It is a lighter touch from the environmental side. And so I don't think it's quite as visible. It's probably why you don't see it as much.
So it's such in demand. We all have to have it. We all need it. We all want it. How do you guys prepare for supply chain disruptions like natural disasters or something that comes up?
Well, I guess there's two ways you can look at it. One, obviously, a disaster that we're aware of, like if a hurricane's entering the Gulf. I mean, you can plan for that. You can seal the well and sail the rig around it. I mean, that's one thing. I kind of mentioned a little bit of security, but I think on the other ones, when you're talking about like disruptions to supply chain, well, we recently sort of had that. And the Trump administration has threatened and in some cases imposed very high tariffs, which could limit or make the expense of what we're doing very costly or limit the ability to get it. The Ukraine-Russia war has put some tension on certain goods. And of course, U.S. and China relations, whoever knows where they are, and China produces quite a bit for American needs, can certainly make issues there. And so, getting, I think, your issues out there on the table, making them vocal to not only elected officials, but to our clients. So, we drill for one of the oil companies, whether that, again, we'll just use Chevron or Shell or BP. These clients of ours are the ones who are really the ones with the skin in the game when it comes to unlocking that resource. And the more we can get information to them and partner with them is the way we can get the information out.
Stuart, you've worked in an industry that operates across so many cultures, so many regions. What have been some of the most rewarding aspects of working globally?
Oh, that's a good question. That is one of the more exciting things. I mean, we tell people when we recruit them, they think, oh, you don't even see your asset, right? It's hundreds of miles off the ocean. You don't get to see it, but what you do get to see can be pretty amazing. The access to travel by the organization, what we're able to do is quite, astounding. I think I've been to almost 80 countries, all six of the seven continents, numerous times. So yes, the cross-border aspect of the industry is quite amazing, and what you as a person it can unlock is quite, again, it's quite amazing.
Stuart, you teed up my next question. Offshore drilling has taken you around the world. What's a place, a culture, an environment that's left a lasting impression on you?
Oh, there have been many. I mean, certainly it's eye-opening, and the silliness. I always like to go to grocery stores when I travel to a new place just to see what they have. And I don't know that Americans realize how spoiled rotten we are. We have access to so many different, ethnic food from different cultures around the world at a regular grocery store like an HEB. When you go to some other countries, they're much smaller, they're a little more narrow. So I always like to go see what people have. But I think the one that has mostly impacted me is Brazil. Primarily, that was my expat assignment. So I was able to live in Rio, and that made it, you're just immersed in their culture. I only got about 10% of Portuguese down, but enough to get by. I could order food, get in a taxi, etc. But it's been certainly the biggest one.
So, Stuart, one more question. When you're working in other countries, are you working kind of for global tax for Transocean? Are you working in that particular country's segment of tax? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It would depend. In my current role, I mean, even when I travel, you're still looking at things globally. I mean, just because the way all the different ownership structures you have and the way, your earnings move around. But, I think it also depends. Like back as an example, when I was in my Brazil assignment, that was dedicated to Brazil. And when you're able to do that, as somebody, if you ever get an expat, chance to be an expat somewhere, you really get immersed into their tax system and see how it interacts with people day to day as well as government decisions. Brazil has a very specialized, especially the city of Rio, it also being an energy capital, has a very special tax system, which the more you learn it, the more you can understand how decisions get made by them, which is going to help benefit your organization as well as you professionally.
So, Stuart, you work in a high stakes, high risk environment. What would you tell the next generation of maybe early engineers or early college graduates to focus on?
It is definitely a high risk area. I mean, I think from a certain perspective, when you're in basically a commodity type industry like this, you've got to have pretty much a thick skin of knowing there's going to be some roller coaster days, and it can be short. It can come out of nowhere. We talked about the geopolitical issues that can impact this. It can happen very quickly. Political headwinds. So I think that's one aspect of it. There's an old phrase, wildcatter. You kind of gotta be one if you want to be part of any industry like this. But I think what I would tell people is when you're looking at it, though, it's learning how to make it more efficient. Those three buckets we talked about. If you're an engineer, especially, learning how to make things faster and cheaper and more efficient, which would reduce emissions, are a big factor. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever against any of that. And so I think that what I would tell people is your focus is more on how can you, as a trained professional or trained college student, bring something to the table that would help one of those three areas.
And what excites you most about the future of energy and Transocean's role in it?
Well, I mean, energy obviously isn't going away. And as population continues to increase, what are we, around 8 billion now? I mean, maybe I think projections are, if trends continue, we could be over 11 billion by the time I move on. And that's a lot of people. And where the population is growing in those areas I mentioned before, they're going to need energy, and they're going to need portable energy, and they're going to need it. They're going to need quite a bit of it. The Western civilization areas are somewhat stagnant or declining in population. Always see these rumors that the last Italian will be born in 200 years or something. But the other areas of the world that I mentioned are growing, and if they continue to grow, they'll need energy, and they'll need it in many different ways. I do think there's a bit of a missed narrative out there about energy. It's not so much energy transition as it is expansion. We need wind, we need solar, we need electric EVs, we need different areas of energy because of the demands. There's also a new industry emerging of AI. I know that's kind of under the tech umbrella, but I may be a little off on my stats, but I think it's close enough to make the point relevant. Over 60% of the energy being consumed right now in the West is by data centers. That's an enormous amount of energy consumption. And that's not something we drill for. I mean, that's mainly natural gas fueling that, but it takes away energy from someplace else that you need to replace it with another form of energy. And again, with this population growth, we're going to definitely have a role to play in unlocking, the hydrocarbons that are under the ocean's floor.
So it's perfect that we sit here in Houston, Texas, the energy capital of the world. We'll be a part of it.
Absolutely, no doubt.
Stuart, thank you for being on the Greater Loop podcast. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.
All right, thanks.